Cannock arose by any other name. In Doomsday it appears as Chenet, and thereafter over 300 years some 11 different versions are recorded. The most accurate form is that of 1130, Cannock, spelled C-H-N-O-C, when in a charter granted by Henry I the name appeared. Probably the correct form would be Cannock, spelled C-N-O-C, which is derived from Celtic words in Irish, Gaelic and Welsh, meaning a hill or a high place, which is appropriate for Cannock Chase. Sharp lawyers turn these different spellings to their advantage, and the plea rolls contain many instances of these tricky objections which were even the Bishop of Lichfield was not afraid to utilise to his advantage over Cannock and Cannock, spelt with one N and two N's.
Doomsday, at that particular point in time, was scribes produce things in Latin, and then the interpretation is shown as on this particular slide. Cannock was Chenet on the Latin form, and the slide shows this in the two parts which are in Latin. In the second paragraph it talks about a hide which is 120 acres, and also a league which is 3 miles. In this second interpretation, a carucate of land is also a hide, as was the hide itself. 6s refers to shillings, which is now the equivalent of 5 pence.
In 1274, the Lord's Mill at Cannock was leased at a rent of 3 shillings and 4 pence, nearly 17 pence today, and in 1281 the mill, still held by a tenant, was extensively repaired. In 1641, the water corn mills near Cannock, commonly called Cannock Mills, and lately held by John Coleman, were leased by William Lord Paget, then Lord of the Manor, to Walter Chetwynd for 21 years at an annual rental of £22. Lord Paget sold the lease of what could have been the same mill to John Birch of Stafford and Robert Sankey of Cannock in 1650, but by 1659 the mills were held by Edward Rowley of Leecroft. In 1697, Cannock Mill, situated on the Brooklyn Readings Bridge, was held by Rowley's grandson, Henry Barton, who in that year conveyed the rights to Edmund Wilson of Cannock. Wilson died in 1709, and his executors renewed the lease in 1710 to Robert Barton, miller, for another 13 years. The present-day Cannock Mill also stands at the Riding Brook on the north side of Mill Street, and the mill pool is used to lie to the north. The water mill is still operational. We would imagine it was operated on a small scale in 1954. The last used machinery is still in existence in the year 2000.
This illustrates the cogs which drove the mill from the mill wheel, and the centre tree which drove everything within the mill. The cogs here were wound up and down so that they could mesh or not mesh, whichever the case may be, and the small cog drove one of the mill stones above, the other one remaining static. This is the enclosure in which the millstones were situated, and as the one stone turned, it threw flour onto the wall of the housing, which actually then fell below, into the room below, into sacks. The cord is used for adjusting the flow of the corn in between the stones. This is John Price, who was the last miller, and he worked for Mr. Noden up until Mr. Noden's death.
In Doomsday, Cannock Forest is recorded as being woodland 6 leagues long and 4 leagues wide, a league being 3 miles, which in those times belonged to the king. Over a considerable period of time, its ownership changed hands many times. In 1546, it was granted to Sir William Paget by Henry VIII and remained in Paget hands until becoming a state forest. By early 13th century, there were 8 hays, a hay being a clearing in the forest. They were Aldrewas, Bentley, Cheslin, Gailey, Hopwas, Ogley, Rugeley and Tedsley. The Rawn Oak, or Rawn Pike, is a tree with a dead summit. It was purported to be well over 1,000 years old. Hooligans set fire to it in early 1930. The fallow deer blend in with the background very well.
In 1259, Henry III granted a right to hold in the manor of Cannock a market every Tuesday, an annual fair on the Virgil, feast and morrow of St Michael in Monte Tumba, on the 15th, 16th, 17th of October. The right was upheld in 1293 and confirmed between 1387 and 1390. By 1747, the Tuesday market had been discontinued, but fairs were being held on the 8th of May, 24th of August and 18th of October, with a feast or wake on the Sunday following the last of these dates. By 1868, markets were being held on Saturday nights, and a market hall was built in Cannock in 1869. By 1924, fairs were no longer being held, but markets were then being held on Tuesday and Saturday, and by 1956 an additional market was being held on Fridays. This shows the old market as it was up to about 1950, and it's followed by alterations which were made to this, giving it a roofed area and uniform stalls. This is 1970. This is the market hall, which was erected in 1869 and then demolished in 1972.
The earliest record we can find of St Luke's Church is in 1143, where a decree donated the churches of Cannock, Rugeley, Aldrewas and Bromley to the Bishop of Coventry and Lichfield by Pope Silentinus and Lateran. During the 12th century, there were disputes over the rights to Cannock Church between the Dean and Chapter of Penkridge and the Dean and Chapter of Lichfield. In 1189, a gift of the towns of Cannock and Rugeley, together with their churches, to Hugh de Nobant, Bishop of Coventry and Lichfield, to finance the expenses of the crusade in which he was about to go. The price was 25 marks, or £16.66 in equivalent today's money. The sale was completed by Easter the 25th of March, 1190. Mouldings over the west tower window are terminated by two shields which are carved on the arms of Humphrey de Stafford, Duke of Buckingham, and Henry Neville, his wife. This could give a date of the tower construction, as he was slain fighting for Henry VI at Northampton in 1460, during the Wars of the Roses. After the Reformation, the building was allowed to fall into a state of disrepair. In 1524, an order was made by the ecclesiastical authorities to put the chancel of the church into a state of competent repair. The vestry was indicated on the 1841 drawings and was probably built in the 17th century. In 1752, the south aisle of the church was rebuilt. The old south doorway, dated 752, was, according to local tradition, supposed to have originated from Leacroft Old Hall, and there is a sundial immediately over it, and this is still in position. The structure of the church is as follows. At the western end of the north side, adjacent to the north door, dates back to the 12th and 13th centuries. In the 14th century, the western end of the nave was almost completely rebuilt. The tower is 14th and 16th century period, with it having a 14th century basement court, with a remainder of almost 16th century. In 1849, the church was repewed and the north side restored. New stores were also placed on the chancel, and at this time there were 615 sittings. In 1882, the nave, north and south aisles, together with the chancel, were extended to their present situation to give seats to parishioners who were unable to find seats. In 1949, the South Chapel was built as a memorial to the fallen in both World Wars. In 1956, the south porch was added.
This is a slide which shows Cannock Church, St Luke's, in 1880. This is a drawing done by John Buckler in 1841, and he did many drawings around the town at the request of William Salt. These are housed in the William Salt Library at Stafford. This is the chancel of the church, done again by Buckler in 1841, and showing a very short church in length, which was basically the west end of the existing church. Pews are vastly different on that one. This shows the stairs up to the western gallery of the church, and you can just see the north door with the font at the bottom of the stairs. This font was replaced after the Second World War and is illustrated on this slide. It was replaced by Bill and Esther Ball, and this slide also shows the north door. The building on this slide was shown in 1885-86, and this was the alterations and the extent of the alterations to the church.
St Mary's was in existence by 1421, when it was granted the contingent remainder of a messuage in Hensford called Monkeyton Place with adjoining land. The chantry of Our Lady in Cannock Church was endowed by 1548 with lands, tithes, 10 cows and £1.33 for the support of a priest, who sang Mass daily at the Lady Altar. Lawrence Perrin, the chantry priest, who had been keeping a grammar school for 30 years, was allowed to continue as schoolmaster. The Roman Catholic Chapel of the Sacred Heart was in existence from 1899 to 1924. The current church was built in 1924, and attendance at Mass in 1956 was over 600 members. In 1604, it was stated that 400 people in Cannock were papists.
This is the old part of St Mary's Church, and this shows the interior as it used to be prior to the current building being built.
A Wesleyan Methodist chapel was first opened in 1842 and was replaced by Trinity Methodist in 1866 in Walsall Road, opposite to Burden Yates Garage. It was demolished in 1970 and replaced by St Stephen's Church in September 1966.
Mill Street Methodist Church has been replaced in very recent years by a new church and also a home for elderly people. The church at St Thomas's at Huntington is very much as it is today on this particular photograph, but considerable changes have taken place to the church over the years. This shows the stump of a tree on the foreground right hand side, whereas this slide actually shows the tree and the telegraph wires which existed in many years ago, early part of this century. This is St Chad's Church at Chadsmore, which was built about early part of this century and is very much as it is today.
The original Congregational Church stood in Stafford Road next to the college. The United Reformed Church was founded in 1816 and the current church was built in 1824.
The manor of Cannock and Rugeley passed to the Paget family and to Sir William Paget on the 26th of October 1546. He was born in 1505 and was the son of a nailer from Wednesbury, but became sergeant at mace to the City of London. He served Henry VIII as secretary and was obviously well trusted by him to have received the appreciation vested in him by being given the lands previously in the hands of the Abbey of Burton upon Trent. Beaudesert, which was part of this estate, had previously been the seat of the Trunwen family. William Lord Paget, which he now was, died in 1563, and although he had been through many trials and tribulations in his life, managed to own this very large estate. The seventh Lord Henry Paget, who became the most noble of the Pagets, became the Earl of Uxbridge in 1814. This Field Marshal, Lord Uxbridge, Knight of the Garter, served with distinction through the Peninsular War and held an important command at Waterloo, where he lost his leg. For his valour and ability, he was created Marquess of Anglesey. He died in 1854.
This is the dining room at the dining hall at Beaudesert, and this is the
Sir John Littleton was the most notable of this family, as he was then the one who revered for his farming abilities, having recovered many thousands of acres of land and brought into fertile usage. He was the first Lord Atherton, who died in 1863, and drained and irrigated large areas of land, producing good crops of wheat, barley, and supporting 2,000 head of cattle and 2,000 head of Southdown sheep.
This is Pillerton Hall, one of the seats of the Hatherton family. This is a painting of the hall which was done prior to the chimneys being either falling down or being demolished. This is Tedsley Hall, which was also another seat of the Hatherton family, and this particular section of the hall has been demolished, but the present owner of the estate has said that he's going to resurrect it. This is part of the existing hall which is left, or part of the hall which has been left, The centre part is where the previous slide showed how the hall had been, and this is Hatherton Hall at some function, and is quite a smart looking building. Now it's been recently redecorated. Blenco's Brewery was situated in Hollis Avenue. This shows the brewery building itself, and was erected in 1878 by William Bradford. It remained as Blenco's Brewery until the 25th of May 1925, when the public houses owned by this company were handed over or sold to Butler's Brewery of Wolverhampton. In the foreground you can actually see on this photograph the brewery dray, and this now is one of the drays with two of the men who worked for Blenco's at Hollis Avenue. The Roebuck Public House still stands in Stafford Road, but it's now been renamed, and this was one of Blenco's public houses. Another was the King's Arms up at Huntington, where 22 houses were erected by Blenco so that they could get 22 signatures asking for a public house. This is Blenco's public house at Shoal Hill Tavern, and was taken about the turn of the century. Another of Blenco's pubs was the Rising Sun, which was in Walsall Road, and you can see a shop with little bow windows, and it's just between there and Jackson's. This is the Royal Oak in Stafford Road behind the Conduit Head, and this is the modern Royal Oak, which has been renovated recently. This is the Swan, built in 1889, and is in the centre. Was in the centre of Cannock. It's now been taken over as part of a wine bar. This is a photograph taken by a Miss Gilpin of the centre of Cannock, and shows on the right hand side the old Crown public house and the bowling green in the centre. This is the Crown as it originally had been built, with the St Luke's Church in the background, taken about 1920. This is the Yew Tree Inn, which stood in Mill Street, and each of the men on here has got a churchwarden pipe, so there must have been some special function on at the time this photograph was taken. This is Four Crosses Inn at Four Crosses, and this was built in 1876. It's the scene of many photographs taken in that area, and this shows cattle in front of a pool across the road from the pub, which must have been an unusual sight, or is an unusual sight today. This is the White Lion on the junction of Cemetery Road and Stafford Road, Cannock, and the road opposite the White Lion led up onto Shoal Hill.
For over 500 years, coal was mined in Cannock Chase, from the early bell pits in Beaudesert Park, with very small tonnages by means of a windlass and basket or corve, to tonnages in excess of 1,500 tonnes per day. Coal replaced the large quantity of timber previously used to heat the homes of both peasant and baron alike. One of the earliest bell pits, obviously the name illustrates the shape of it, where they put a small shaft down into the seam and opened it out and supported it. Eventually, when they couldn't get any further, they backfilled it and came back up to the surface. The shafts were sunk with timber, and it was so designed that they could put the timber in as they went down, and on the way back out again, when the mine was finished, they could withdraw the timber to use again. The first sinking at Littleton Colliery was in 1877, but failed in 1881 due to the quantity of water which was encountered and which could not be controlled. In 1898, work commenced again. With improved technology, the mine opened and coal production began in 1902. Littleton before its final closure. Leecroft Colliery stood where the present waste disposal site is situated. The scene shown is the late 1800s and the early 1900s. It was later connected underground to meet Cannock Colliery, where 2 shafts were sunk in 1879. But due to problems with water, it was forced to close. Eventually, it reopened in 1914 with the increased demand for coal due to the 1914-18 World War.
These are officials at one of the Chase collieries and show them in various poses. One with 2 lamps holding from his belt, which obviously isn't supporting his trousers. One where the next chappie has his belt supporting his stomach. The third one with tea in his pocket. These are miners' houses and show the toilets across from the back door, and at the far end a pigeon pen. Many miners were interested in keeping pigeons. This is hand-holing, in other words, fetching the coal out from underneath the seam so that they could either allow the coal to drop or alternatively blow the coal, and then tubs would be loaded up with it and it taken to the surface. Many miners worked on their knees because they found this was a more economic way of using their energies, and speaking to an old miner, he said it was a much easier way than standing and bending. Here you can see them using picks and loading the tubs. Pit ponies were obviously used to a considerable amount down the collieries as they withdrew coal from the seam and brought it to the shaft to take it up to the surface. They were well looked after by the people who were in charge of them. Most people did respect their horses and groom them well and feed them well. This is called snapping or snap time, which is where people had a meal down the pit, and no doubt the ponies got certain titbits as well. This is the sign of the 1926 strike, when people were getting coal from the slag heaps on the surface. The man third from the right on the back row was called George the Black locally. Most people knew him, and he was one of the first coloured people to work in this area. Also children and women worked collecting bits of coal from slag heaps in the 1926s.
The first recorded school in Cannock was at the time of the Reformation, when a Roman Catholic priest called Lawrence Perrin was recorded as having run the grammar school for 30 years, and he was allowed to continue the school at an annual salary of £4 14 shillings and 5 pence, £4 72 pence today. Later history of the school is obscure. John Wood School, which stood originally in High Green opposite the Bowling Green. In 1680, John Wood of Paternoster Row, London, gave a house in Cannock to be used by a schoolmaster to teach children to read. For some time between 1725 and 1818, the master of this school appears to have received 24 shillings, £1 20 pence today, each year for teaching 2 poor boys and 2 poor girls under a bequest of Mary Chapman. Further bequests from Dorothy Birch and John Biddulph contributed money and land for the assistance of the school. The plaque on the front of the old school was removed with the sale of the school, and now resides at the entrance of the new school, which was opened on the 24th of May, 19